Hi, friends. It's Pastor Veronica here with Destination Bible Stories. And this week we are exploring the Dead Sea. Now, I know that one of the really appealing things about this Destination Bible Stories is to experience these places in new and different ways and to understand what they're really like, not just what we hear in Bible stories. And so today, as we explore the Dead Sea, I actually have a few little things to show you that are not pictures, but actual things from the Dead Sea. And I have a little bit of a story to tell you. So one of the reasons that I wanted to do this series on Bible locations is because I've actually had the privilege to be able to visit the Holy Land and visit a lot of the places that are in Scripture. And it was such an amazing experience. And I have I've been kind of hoping for another opportunity to get back to the Holy Land to visit some of these places again. And of course, no one is traveling right now, so it may be a little while before that happens. But I wanted to be able to share that with you all. And it sort of helps to understand too, rather than just describing something the way we hear about it out of a book, but to hear someone's personal experience of a place. And so the Dead Sea is a place that we hear about all the time. And we're going to be looking at some of the other bodies of water as well. I'm going to touch a little bit on the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, and the Mediterranean Sea, just a little bit when we talk about some of these other places that we will get to. So the Sea of Galilee we'll look at next week, just kind of briefly. So today we're looking at the Dead Sea, but the first thing I'd like to do is to just help you get an understanding of why it is so special and significant that we learn about the actual places that are in Scripture. And so I'd love to read you the introduction that I have. This is from the Carta Bible Atlas, and this is the fifth edition that just recently came out. If you're ever really interested in maps and geography, this is a really great book. It's very, very intensive, so it's very I would say it's like very academically heavy. Certainly not a light read, but it's really neat because it has these amazing maps in it of that are just clear and easy to read. But I want to read to you this sort of introduction to understand why we have such a hard time today, sort of putting places with those stories. And so let me begin. This is called "The Four Winds of the Heavens and Their Names." A reading from Genesis chapter 13, verses 14 through 15. The Lord said to Abram, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which you see, I will give to you and to your descendants forever." So that is our introduction. That basically all that Abram could see, God made. And what a beautiful reminder that no matter which direction we look, everything that we can see, God made. And so let me continue. To the north, the winter-bound, snow-covered mountains of the Lebanon. To the south, the semi-arid Negev. To the east, the wide desert. To the west, the great sea. These are the natural borders of Canaan, which we now know as Israel. Within their confines was enacted the history of Israel from the days of the patriarchs on. A look at the landscape, its roads and ancient settlements, and the country surrounding it are a prerequisite for a proper understanding of this history. We possess no ancient map depicting the Holy Land in the biblical period. If such did exist, we can assume that it would face eastward, for in ancient Hebrew the word forward also indicates east. Behind and seaward mean west. Right means south, and left means north. Benjamin, the son of the right hand, is the southernmost of the Rachelite tribes. The Dead Sea is also referred to in Hebrew as the Forward or Eastern Sea. The Great Sea, which we know as the Mediterranean of today, is also called the Latter or Western Sea. One of the oldest maps is the Medeba map. This is a mosaic floor dating from the 6th century AD in a church at Medeba to the east of the Dead Sea. This map was intended to show the Holy Land of the Bible and faces eastward. At the center appears the Dead Sea, on which two sailboats appear. It was prepared more than 1,000 years after the destruction of the first temple and is of limited value for the identification of ancient sites. The Bible does not, as a rule, give many descriptions of settlements, their location, and character. These matters were taken for granted then, and only a few verses diverge from this rule. The outstanding case being the description of the site of Shiloh and the story of the abduction of the wives from the Benjamites. So, unlike Shiloh, most locations are merely described in vague terms in the Bible. Thus, in reconstructing the ancient map of the Holy Land in the various periods, we must lean heavily on 4 factors. 1. Analysis of the history, character, and general topography of the individual site in the light of available sources. 2. Identifications in later sources. 3. The preservation of the ancient name with possible modifications during transfer from Hebrew to Aramaic and Arabic. And 4. Archaeological examination of the site under consideration in the light of the above data. So, that sounds like a whole lot of rambling things, but what it is trying to explain is that we do our best. We base things on the actual physical history of a space, matching up with descriptions from Scripture. We base our the information that we have on the knowledge that's passed down through generations. We base the information we have on other sources that came out around the same or similar times, things that are not the Bible, but other works. And then we just look at everything that's actually there and go from there and see if we can connect the dots. So it's a big process to try to figure out where things are or where things were at the time. We think this is where something happened based on the information we have, but in a lot of cases, no one's really for sure. Last week when we talked about the Garden of Gethsemane, we think that is where Jesus went to pray the night that he was handed over, but we don't know for sure because it doesn't say, there's no marker that says, Jesus was here. It doesn't work that way. And so we have to go by what we have. So just know and keep that in mind, that it's possible that a place that we talk about, we might find out 50 years from now, someone uncovers a scroll inside of a jar, which has happened before, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and inside of it says, here's a map, and it's very clear, oh, that didn't happen here, it happened in this other garden, things like that. We learn more as time goes on, and I think that's really fascinating and can be really, really fun. That sometimes we think where something happened, that's not at all where it happened. We also sometimes have in our minds, we perceive the way something looked or the way something was, and then we find out that's not really at all. Growing up, one of the great examples is growing up, I thought that Plymouth Rock was like a huge, massive rock that when the Mayflower came across the ocean from Europe, that that was the rock that the ship stopped on and tapped. And having actually physically gone to Massachusetts and been to Plymouth and seen Plymouth Rock, it is quite the disappointment. It's not very big at all. Certainly not as big for a ship to hit. And there's still kind of uncertainty because there were no cameras as to whether or not that's the real Plymouth Rock, but rather something that's been set aside for us to explore and learn about. And in a lot of cases, that's what we have with historical sites from the Bible, especially with some of the towns and villages and things where things happen. Where we are really lucky is in bodies of water whose names haven't changed over time. The Dead Sea has been the Dead Sea for a very long time. And so we know, what we call the Dead Sea now, based on all of the information that we have from the past and all of the descriptions throughout Scripture and all of the historical documentation, the maps, and the actual physical body of water and what it is, we know, hey, this is the Dead Sea. We know this for sure. This is the Dead Sea of the Bible, and that's where certain things happen. And so that is a really wonderful thing. The actual physical landscape part is very helpful. So that is a little introduction, a little primer for you. about the Dead Sea. Oh, you'll hear references to the Dead Sea throughout Scripture. Very, just it's a well known place, and there's a lot about it that makes it special. And so I have for you a map, so that you can see sort of where it is, in location to other sites. And so let's see, I'm trying to hold it up so you can see a little bit better. So the Dead Sea is right here. You can see that's a pretty significant body of water. It's quite large. And of course, it's not the same as Mediterranean Sea, which is right here, which, coastal covers all this. In fact, the Mediterranean Sea is one we'll be talking about when we talk about some other places later on. Talk about Joppa and Sidon and other places. So, but just to give you an idea, here's the Mediterranean Sea. Of course, we all know the Sea of Galilee. That's where Jesus picked up the disciples. Some of them. Jordan River connects to the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea was really close to Jerusalem and Bethlehem. It had a border in Judah, which we hear about a lot as well, and Moab and Gilead and Edom. So those are sort of the regions that surround it. But you can see it's quite large. Now, what's significant about the Dead Sea, other than a whole bunch of stuff happened around it, of course, in biblical history, but what's also significant about the Dead Sea is that it's like no other body of water in the world. It is the saltiest sea in the world. It has the highest concentration of salt in it, of any body of water. And believe me, you cannot miss that. There is no question that it is an incredibly salty body of water. In fact, it is so salty that you will float without any effort at all. The salt actually holds you up in the water. I've actually been there, and it's so wild when you get there. You sort of look at it and you're like, oh, it's just like a little beachy area. Seas are smaller oceans, right? The oceans are big, huge, massive bodies of water that are filled with salt and creatures and things. But the Dead Sea is a much, much smaller body of water, but it does have waves, and those waves come crashing in. From far away, you're like, oh, it's just a sort of a big saltwater lake. It's kind of how it feels. And then you get a little bit closer and you get the smell of the sea, right? Like you would go to a beach. And then you look at what you think is the beach and you realize that it's not. It's very rocky. And then you notice that the rocks are white. And then when you get really close, you look at them, the rocks are white because they're covered in salt. That is actually how much salt there is. In fact, I want to show you when we went to the Dead Sea. I did get in the water. I didn't get all the way in. I got in just to about my knees. And so, but you could feel it. Actually, the salt actually would sting your skin a little bit. For those of you who might shave your legs, no one warned me about how harsh the salt would be on my skin, and I had shaved my legs the day before, and so my legs turned red where from shaving, the skin was a little bit, it was open, and so that salt stung, and my legs were bright red, every place that the water touched. The rocks are very sharp from the salt crystals, which is crystallized. The salt, however, is amazing on your skin. Even though I got a little rash from where my skin, where I had shaved, it makes your skin incredibly soft. It was probably the softest my feet have ever been. Of course, you can buy products with Dead Sea salt in them. You can get mud, like the Dead Sea mud is like a big thing for doing your skin. And I think most of the women there sort of jokingly had fun with, scooping up some of the salt and exfoliating our skin and, putting stuff on our face and doing mud masks. And of course, around it, just like any other beach, it's a big touristy thing to go to the Dead Sea and float, because you don't have to know how to swim. It's probably one of the few places that non-swimmers would feel comfortable. But everything is really covered in salt. The salt spray is so thick and heavy. Imagine if it's enough to keep a grown person from drowning, then clearly it's very, very salty. And everything is covered with salt. So they have, signs about, swim at your own risk, or they have little tables and things. And the signage is like corroded from the salt. So they have to replace it every so often. They also, the signs get like a layer of thick salt on them. And it's just wild to see. Just absolutely fascinating. Can you imagine for the people at that time? We talk about, we use salt as a seasoning in our food. It gives everything more flavor. And they would have had access to a lot of salt. They used it to cure fish and other foods to make them last longer. Things were brined in salt water. Salt is a preserving agent. We don't use it as much for that anymore, but if you ever wondered why a jar of pickles can sit on your shelf for years and still taste fine when you open it, it's the salt. That's what preserves it, which is pretty remarkable. So what I have to show you today is when we went there to the Dead Sea, I was like, oh, wow, look at these really pretty white rocks. And then I picked them up, and these are not white rocks at all. Well, they are white rocks, but they're not what you might think. These are actually pieces of salt. They're salt crystals. So you can see that. I don't know, you see my hand as just to give you a little idea. So this is my hand, and that's how big they are. And actually, these have worn a little bit over time. I went to Israel and Palestine in 2008. So it's been over 10 years since I was there. So as I've moved and traveled, they've, little bits have come off. In fact, I can feel on my fingers there's a little bit of salt powder just from this little bit of touching. So I'm sure someday when I pass these on to my son Harry, they'll be even smaller. So I've got this one, and then this one here is the one that really fooled me. It is completely flat on one side. And so I just really assumed it was like a pebble that had been flat on one side, but this is actually a crystal of salt. And these are on the small side. I picked pieces that I could put in my pocket. There were ones there that were bigger than my fist, and then there were rocks that were covered with so much salt that you could no longer see the rock anymore. Same with some of the items that were there. If somebody, there was a sign about accessing the restrooms for there was a little shop and snack shop that was there. And the sign was like thick with salt. It was so covered. And they said they have to replace the sign every couple of months because it gets so covered in the salt as it's in the air. And we know that that's true of the ocean. People who have beach homes know that the salt gets on things and can corrode. But just imagine if that corrosion happened in days and weeks instead of years. And then just having the salt be thickly covering everything. It was absolutely wild to see these, salt crystals. And again, these are small ones, but there were ones that were massive. Just huge chunks of salt, or big chunks of clusters of salt crystals. And that's pretty, we have nothing, we have Salt Lake, the Great Salt Lake in Utah here in the United States. But it's definitely not the same. I've been to the Salt Lake, and it's not the same at all. The Dead Sea, the water is constantly moving, so there was no smell. It didn't stink. Even in the warm weather months, because the water is constantly moving, it's not settled. It's just absolutely remarkable. And those waves leave layers of salt on the beach there, and it's just really incredible. And those of you who are here in Killeen and catch this, or in the Killeen area, Central Texas area, these are in my office. If you ever want to come and see them, I would happily let you pick them up. And no, you cannot taste them. I've had somebody who has asked to taste them, and that would be gross because then everybody would want to do that, and we don't want to share germs. But they are indeed salts, I promise you. So I thought I would share that with you as well. So There you go. Just some rocks. And actually, I think I have another one. This is an actual rock from the beach. And this was coated in salt. And sort of slowly over time, the salt has come off. You can see there's just a little bit of a white layer to it as well. But mostly just the other one. So, well, that's what I have for you today about the Dead Sea and about its location and just sort of about why it's so, why we know the Dead Sea is the Dead Sea and why we don't know for sure some of these other sites if that's really where things happened. But I hope that you learned a little something today and enjoyed this deeper look at the Dead Sea and what it is. So now the next time you hear the phrase the Dead Sea in the Bible, you can think about what it is and how remarkable it is and how unique it is. Well, friends, I hope that you had a good experience learning about this. I look forward to having you join me next week where we explore some other sites as part of our series Destination Bible Stories. Thank you for joining me today and have a wonderful rest of your day.